really delighted to be here today with Brad. Brad has been a very frequent visitor on the Meaning Code. And Brad, for those people who have never met you before, I wonder if you could just give us like the 30-minute elevator pitch of what you do and
30 minutes.
Sit in. And no, I should have said 30 seconds.
Yeah, okay, I could do
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Sorry about that.
I'm just kidding. So
That'd
my
be a
name's
long
Brad.
elevator
Yeah,
ride.
it would. Whew, how big's that building? So my name's Brad, and I've been involved with Karen's channel since she started it in the comment section mainly, but through the years we've had some conversations, and mainly like I brought in some insights, I guess, regarding measurement, and talked about how horse training really opened my understanding to a lot of the concepts that are being talked in this little corner, talked about in this little corner. So, and things that Peterson has brought up. So I kind of came here through a um, different path than most people. It's not really academic, but more through training horses. So I thought
And
today,
what do you do for a living?
oh, I'm a mechanical designer. So
Okay.
I design automation equipment and I do product design.
So that's the other reason that we've had so many good conversations is because design is a big interest of mine. So
Yeah, creativity comes
mm,
in many forms, doesn't it?
yes,
And there's a lot of common threads
yes,
throughout. So,
gotcha. So
so
today you had some things you wanted to talk about, Brad. You sent me an email
yes,
and it was timely because you said you wanted to talk about implicit and explicit knowing. And as I mentioned to you earlier, last night I started reading this book by David Bohm called On Creativity, which I think he wrote in the 60s, maybe. And this first published in 1996, but but he must have written it much longer before. I think what they did is they went back through a lot of David Bohm's interviews that he did with some artists and some religious thinkers, and bringing physics into that, and then they made it into a book. So it was published in 1996, but it has a lot of his ideas, and it's in his own words. And he's a remarkably articulate man, and David Bohm's whole theory of physics had to do with the implicate and explicit order. And what he meant by that, it's very hard to get a picture of this, but it's the idea that the entire universe starts out enfolded, all folded up, and then it unfolds. And each thing in the universe is enfolded and then it unfolds. And the whole universe is inside each thing that begins to unfold. And it's a very big idea to wrap your head around. But the implicate order would be the enfolded, enfold, and then the explicate order would be the unfolded, the part that you can see. And this book happens to be about his ideas about art and creativity, not so much about the implicate and explicate order, but I think there's a lot to be found in this idea of implicit and explicit. So I'm interested in what you've been thinking.
So as you were talking there, I really think we should nail down what I mean by explicit, because if you do a search on the internet, there's a lot of different definitions about this, and implicit as well. But I wanted to just say, get out what I think it means. So to me, the explicit are the things that are explained. So, and that could be through communication, it could be through our senses, um, written text, things that are explained that we can engage with directly. Implicit would be more along the lines of intuition. It's what's implied by the explicit knowledge. So it's not directly revealed to us, but we can tell it's there. Um, and so it's two different types of knowing. I thought of kind of maybe a funny way of saying this, but So if a man asks his wife, honey, what do you want for Christmas? And she says nothing. She's saying something explicit, but she's implying something totally different, right? So it, it's or like the saying, where there's smoke, there's fire. That's an implicit claim, right? So there's something that said, or if you see fire, or I'm sorry, you see smoke, there's a fire there. So that's kind of, we've been having a lot of discussions. I mainly just kind of lurk in the background and don't really engage too much, but listening to different people on this little corner talking about knowing. And you had a guest on the other day, and I was actually thinking about this very deeply. I had a friend that passed away 3 weeks ago, and him and I uh, kind of danced around these subjects. And so it brought all that back to me, back to the foreground of your mind. You know how that works? So, and then you had that guest on, and I was just like, we need to talk about this because I just have to get this out. So, one of the things I wanted to share is a verse from First Corinthians, actually several verses, the whole passage. Is that something that I could share on the screen?
Sure. Yeah, I set you up to share.
Okay. Let me see here. I got my camera right in the way. There we go. Um,
Yeah, that's good.
can you see it?
I can.
So, um, this is the love chapter. Everyone heard this at a wedding, I'm sure, at least once. But this is just talking about agape. And I went back and I listened to our last conversation that you and I had. Um, and it was I was trying to frame how agape is the lens that we look through. And that's how we have communion with each other. That agape is what binds it together. So there's a hierarchy. Agape is there, which is God in my mind. Um, and so that's what this chapter is actually about. It's about agape. So if I speak with the tongues of mankind and of angels, but do not have love, agape, I have become a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and know all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. And if I give all my possessions to charity, and if I surrender my body so that I may glory, do not have love, it does me no good. Love is patient, love is kind, it is not jealous, it does not brag, it is not arrogant, it does not act disgracefully, it does not seek its own benefit, it does not it is not provoked, does not keep an account of wrong suffered. It does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices with the truth. It keeps every confidence. It believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. That's usually where the pastor stops at a wedding. But I wanted to focus on the end of this passage, but I didn't think it would really do much without the beginning part. So, love never fails. But if there are gifts of prophecy, they will be done away with. If there are tongues, they will cease. If there is knowledge, it will be done away with. For we know in part and we prophesy in part. But when the perfect comes, the partial will be done away with. When I was a child, I used to speak like a child, think like a child, reason like a child. When I became a man, I did away with childish things. And this is the important verse here, I think. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I will know fully, just as I also have been fully known. But now faith, hope, and love remain, these three, but the greatest of these is love. So, of everything that's said here, love is the end game. That's I can stop sharing here. Love is the end game. That's really what everything is about. It's about communion, communion with God, with His church, with our families, our neighbors, communion with our friends, communions with our enemies, communion with creation, which really is a that's really important to me. Like God is in creation all the way down to the very bottom, I think, and he holds everything together. Maybe I should pull that verse back up. I'm sorry. Um, just so people can see it. I gotta look around my camera here. So where it says, "For now I see in a mirror dimly," and what my idea here is, what I'm trying to share is that the explicit things, the logos, the reality that we're in, the things that we can sense, all those things are there to reflect the mystery so that you can see it. But you only see it dimly. I mean, the way it's worded here, it's like we're trying to see the face of God, but we're looking through a mirror dimly, and we don't see him face to face. I don't think we can. That's kind of the picture you see in Exodus with Moses on Mount Sinai, that he he couldn't look upon him, and just being close to him, the it was Isaiah, you see that same picture where he's undone by being in the presence of God. But even more than that, it's just we can't comprehend everything. In our last discussion, one of the things that came out was something Peterson says. Um, Either nothing matters or everything does. You've heard him say that. We talked about it,
Yes. Uh-huh.
so, but if you think that through a little bit, you'll see that on both ends of that binary, there there's a crushing weight of nihilism. If nothing matters, then you're crushed by that side. If everything matters, then you're crushed by the fact you can't know everything. So we only see part. We only ever see part. And it's like knowing is like, why do we know things? It's so that we can see the implicit, so that we can see love, so that we can act in the world properly. That's the whole point of knowing. And that's kind of what the passage before, talking about how knowledge passes away, language passes away, everything's going to pass away, but faith, hope, and love. Do you think that's interesting?
I do. I really like what you said there, where you said the whole point of knowing is to be able to see, um,
See the reflection, not directly.
to see the reflection of his glory. Because if you said that we are crushed on both ends of that binary. And certainly, if everything matters, that's crushing, not only in the sense that we can't know everything, but it's such an immense responsibility
Right.
to think that every single thing that I say and every single thing that I do matters. And I think part of that is because reason we lose track of that is that we don't have the historical view of our actions. We only see in the moment, or maybe we can look back on our past and we can see how something had some impact, but we have absolutely no idea what impact what we're doing this moment is going to have 5 years from now, or 100 years from now, or 500 years from now.
Right.
I'm sure that Joseph had no idea whatsoever when he was captured in slavery that he was going to end up saving two nations. And even then, when he was in the midst of saving those two nations, he probably had no idea whatsoever that that story was going to become central to transforming millions and millions of people over countless generations.
Right.
And it's a gift that we don't know all these things, because if we knew them, we'd be terrified to move forward.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Yes. Yes. I thought the same thing. And I was just going to bring that up, that it would change how we act. It would certainly certainly affect how we attend to it, which would probably mess it all up. So that's uh that's kind of, I guess, the point about what I wanted to share. I'm going to stop sharing now, and then I can get back
I
on
just
my.
want to say one thing about a little bit earlier, you were talking about how God is in everything all the way down and how he holds all things together. And I just ran into something in this book by David Bohm on creativity. It's on page 106 for anybody who has the book. I'm just going to read a paragraph here because I
Sure.
think he has a beautiful way of writing. He's talking about art, um, the art of life as a whole. We have to be both creative artists and skilled artisans. We are thus always in the act of fitting an ever changing reality so that there is no fixed or final goal to be attained. Rather, at each moment, the end and the means are both to be described as the action of making every aspect fit. This notion of fitting extends into all aspects of life, including even those that have been called moral or ethical, and which have to do with the good, that's in quotes. The word good is indeed derived from an Anglo-Saxon root, the same as that of gather and together, which means to join. And so it may be suggested that early notions of the good implied some kind of fitting together in all that man does. And I wrote down in the margin, he holds all things together. You know, God is good. He is the only one that is good. And the idea that it means fitting things together, I thought was just a beautiful picture. The fact that the Latin word bene, meaning good, and the word bellus, meaning beauty, are related in origin further confirms the suggestion that this is generally how people may have looked on such questions. Recalling that beauty means to fit in every respect, we could say that such a significance of the good is still relevant today. In other words, the good is that which fits, not only in practical function and in our feelings and aesthetic sensibilities, but also that which by its action leads to an ever wider and deeper sort of fitting in every phase of life, both for the individual and for society as a whole. And again, in the margin, I had written context requires someone to judge the context. People always say, oh, well, it depends on the context. Well, what that means is that somebody is deciding the context, and then there has to be a decider above that and a decider above that, right?
Right, all the way
So the
up.
whole idea of context implies that there is a judge of the context. And I've talked before about this idea of the artist. Every stroke of paint that they choose, the choice is what's going on in their mind in terms of how to make the painting what they want it to be. But because the painting keeps changing with every stroke, then the context is new with every stroke. So that context is always shifting. And the goal of the artist is to always find a way to fit that next stroke into the context as it is now, and to bring about a new context so that there's this ever moving creative result that's going on with this always fitting. Everything has to fit. And I thought that was pretty cool. And then,
That is
it
cool.
seemed to fit in with what you were talking about.
Yeah, because I was going to go on to this idea of how we stand back and reflect. And so when you're fitting things together in a painting, you do step back and
Mm-hmm.
you're reflecting on what's being implied by the painting, I would suspect, right? And we do that with
Yeah.
our
Well,
lives.
the whole the building of the painting is making what's implicit explicit, right? It's taking the idea, and then fleshing it out, building
Hmm.
it up so that it becomes something that other people can see and other people can reflect on. But the hope is always that what is being communicated is also being understood on the other side. And so to find a way to take something that's inside the artist that's so complex it can't really be put into words, and make something that communicates that same idea or feeling to someone else who's looking at it, it's not really that much different than what you do when you're designing, when you're doing mechanical designing. You have an idea in your mind, you want to build that design because you have an idea of what that design can do for people, and you need to make it in such a way that it communicates that goal to people and that they can actually use it, right?
Hmm. So there's a reflection of the fitment and on a machine when I'm designing it at different stages. And then other people get involved too, because they're electrical controls, that do the programming, and other people get involved to make sure it's going to fit together before it is actually built. But um, I guess I'm getting more and more convinced that even as we do this, it's still it's like the idea of the creation implies a creator, that there's still an implication in the painting, that there's something left unsaid.
Yes.
There's this, so there's if it's done right, you make it explicit enough that there's enough information there to point to something else that's implicit. It's a reflection of that implicit thing, whatever it is. A mystery maybe is the best way to say it. It's but there's that implication that something else is still there. So
Well, that's what engages the viewer. If that weren't true, then people wouldn't even bother looking at it,
because
because
it's already defined.
yeah, if it,
Everything's
I mean, as
there,
if it's
right?
so obvious. But
Yeah.
it's an interesting thing. Even with a photograph, this can happen because a photograph, part of what makes a photograph a work of art is the choice of context that the photographer makes, and the choice of where to look, what to focus on, how much of it to include in the frame, so that when the viewer looks at it, there's still questions because there's more outside the frame than there is inside the frame. So there's plenty of room for contemplation. And even within the frame, there's probably more information than we can take in, because there's just a whole lot, always more there than you can
Oh,
imagine, right?
yeah. Oh, sure. Right. Yeah. Yeah. When you going back to like everything mattering, everything, and then every relation between all those things and all the different combinations of it, unbelievable how that explodes. So,
Mhm.
but you want to capture enough of their attention and focus to convey something. So I was thinking about like the parables. Jesus would say, "The kingdom of heaven," something mysterious. It's implied that it's there, and but it's like a mustard seed. So he would lay out a some kind of explicit um, reference frame so that the divine or the mysterious could be reflected off of it. So the reality is there so that we can actually see the communion and the love that God is calling us into. So like the whole point of knowledge should be love. That's what we're aiming towards. That's the end goal. So that when I started to think about this, especially like the news, when you turn on the news anymore, it's like you get programmed who you're supposed to hate today. And it's just terrible. It's like knowledge, but it's not knowledge is pointing towards love at all. It's something that it's so wrong to me. I don't know. It's hard to. put into words, but
Well, I haven't watched the news for about 4 years or
good
5
for
years.
you.
But even just, I mean, I have a very tightly curated Twitter feed that's just dedicated to a handful of very important people for me in terms of what I'm thinking about, and then a few pastors. But every once in a while, something that's promoted will pop in there, and it'll always be some
Right.
political thing, and just the vitriol.
Yeah.
It's like
Right.
I just want to go take a shower after I read.
Yeah.
So,
Especially if you isolate yourself from it for a while. You almost feel like dirty. You get desensitized to it. And then when you
yeah.
are re-exposed after you separate from it for a while, it's like, whoa.
Well, I love this idea that the whole point of knowledge is love, because I mean, I know what I'm getting from that. I don't know what you're actually saying, but I'm going to tell you what I get from it, and then maybe our viewers can also think about what they're getting from it. But to me, like, so before I started this channel, I had a long conversation with Paul Vanderklay, and that video is still out there someplace, I think. Um, I wonder how it holds up now after 5 years. But one of the things I was thinking about at that time was how the entire universe consists of information or knowledge, that every particle, the location and trajectory and speed of every particle, and what all those particles constitute, and what they make up, and all of that is, it's all knowledge to be gained, which is why we have science and history and philosophy, and all these domains of knowledge. In other words, there's an infinite amount of knowledge just waiting for us to discover it. It's almost like a playground. It's like we could go out there and explore forever and find new things that we could bring back into. We could find a lot of things out there in the unknown and bring them back into the known to kind of refresh things and continually be learning. But we don't tend to look at that as the gift that it is. I mean, that the fact that all that knowledge is that, it's like an offering of love. Every single one of those things that a scientist discovers was an offering of love that was calling them forward, saying, here, take a look at this. You'll find something interesting here. I promise
Right.
you, but we tend to think, oh, it's because we figured out there was something over there, and then we figured out how to take it apart and analyze it. But really, it's just this offering, a gift of love coming to us.
Right. And then our left brain apprehends it rather than our right brain comprehending it. So it becomes something that we can wield for financial gain or whatever, power. So yeah, that's a good way to put it though. It's like those things are there, but they're there. What my idea here is that they're there for love.
Mm,
Even language, it says language is there, but it will fade away. It's there. The logos, everything is here for us to comprehend love. That, that's
mhm,
that's why we engage with it. That's why we're supposed to engage with it. I guess maybe I should
mhm,
say that. So I think I told you I wanted to talk about a few stories that,
mhm,
and I picked three that I think everyone would know, at least know of. Maybe they haven't read them, they've seen the movies or something. So, um, Lord of the Rings by Tolkien, and the Space Trilogy by C.S. Lewis, and then Dune by Herbert. They're all pretty popular, I would think, and they're all fiction too. So I wanted to pick something that was fiction. So this is how I see Lord of the Rings. I see Lord of the Rings as a tale of two narratives, right? That there's one narrative that's explicit, then that's the narrative of Sauron. Are you familiar? I'm sure you read it or watched the movies or.
I read it a long time ago,
Okay.
and I watched the movies about 4 times. So yeah,
Okay. So you should at least be able to track what I'm saying here.
yeah.
So the ring, from to me, what the ring is a frame. It's a narrative. And through that narrative, Sauron sees Middle Earth, and the spell around the outside is what he thinks Middle Earth is. It's all bound to him. It's his narrative, and that's the way he sees everything. But then there's another narrative, and that's the narrative that reaches outside of Middle Earth and comes down, and that narrative is implicit. It's not really described in the story to any depth, but the reader when you watch a movie, you know it's there. And that's really the narrative that matters. And everybody in the story is talking about that loosely, like Sam's talking about Rosie in the Shire, and or when Gandalf dies fighting the Balrog, he kills it, but it ends up killing him too. He's spent. But something above, outside the story, lifts him out, transfigures him into Gandalf the White, who's more powerful than Saruman. So there's a force outside the story that's directing things. Tom Bombadil is another character that saves the hobbits a couple times when they're on their way to Bree. He gives the knife to Merry that's fashioned and made to kill the Witch King, which he uses on the plains in front of Minas Tirith. So that whole narrative out there, something's directing all that. So, but it's implicit. It's not really described with any detail. It's like loose, and it's a mystery, and it's there. Um, when you get to the space trilogy, what Lewis did there, he took the things that are implicit in our world, and in this story, he made them all explicit. So all of the supernatural creatures are discovered by Ransom, and I think it's interesting that he discovers them through language, his understanding of language. So there's a connection to the language there. I thought that was pretty interesting. That was in the first book, but do you see what I'm getting at with what Lewis did?
Well,
So,
keep talking. I just read those last year, and then of course I had a series on the meaning code about them,
mhm.
but um I've read a lot of books since, so
Okay.
my brain is all crammed up. But I mean, I do remember Ransom was a philologist, so he was a student of languages, and that's what enabled him to learn the language when he got onto Mars and then later Venus. I'm not quite clear on what you mean when you say the he found these
So in the first book, he finds the Horus, I think they're called, the otter-like people or animals, kind of hybrids.
uh-huh.
And so he learns their language, and through that language, then he starts to learn about their culture, and he learns about the
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
yeah. So that led to him discovering things that are implicit to us. So even though he was from Earth, he didn't have any awareness to any of this. But when he went there, he was made aware of it. So C.S. Lewis, and he made our implicit explicit. He explained it all in his
Hmm.
story. In his story. So you see the difference what he did there. I mean,
Hmm.
that's so. Then
Well,
when you
isn't that partly why Tolkien and Lewis disagreed about um the way to tell these stories? I think Tolkien felt that maybe Lewis was too explicit in the way that he talked about things, because Tolkien always sort of put things in the, in
he left them a
kind of
mystery,
leave more to the viewer's imagination, I guess.
right?
Yeah.
Right. So that would be so movies today. That's why I think they've gotten so bad, is they're explaining everything, but they're explaining them in a way that it doesn't It doesn't even make sense. So, um,
Well, and it's just all propaganda. I mean,
yeah, yeah,
here,
right,
this is what you're supposed to know, and this is what you're supposed to believe,
right,
and these are
right.
the good
Well,
people.
that's the danger, though, in what C.S. Lewis did, and we do that. And I'm gonna circle back here a little bit and kind of explain how I think that works. But let me move on to Dune real quick, and I won't talk a lot about this. I started reading this book. When did that movie come out? Last year. Um, I read it a long time ago, the first book. But anyway, I could not get through 3 books of this series. In Dune, absolutely everything is explicit, and everything is a transhumanist point of view, and it's all fueled by drugs. It's the spice is how people can compute everything. They have the mentats, they have the space guild. They take the spice, it augments their abilities to be able to see everything and the relation between everything, and then play out all the different um, possibilities. And that's what governs their universe. And there's religion there, but it's religion that's been hijacked to control people.
Well,
So
see, I watched the first third of that movie when it came out, and I just couldn't make it any further. But I would have never gotten any of that out of what I saw in the movie. I mean, the movie is just people kind of wandering around.
and in
I
the
guess you
movies,
have
it's
to read the book to get it.
right. It's a lot harder to catch all that in the movie, but in the books, it's like these people are just constant. It's like you take game theory and psychedelics and you mash it together and you end up with Dune. It's like minds that are like hyper aware. Um, but it's like that's kind of like where we're headed. At
But in
least
wasn't the
some
whole
people
thing
are.
in Dune that they stopped using computers a long time before because they saw the danger of it?
Because they could do it with their minds and spice. The spice was a drug that allowed their mind to do the same thing. So their mind
I
could run
see.
it could do what the AI was doing before.
So
So
so does the spice kind of eliminate the inhibitions or reduce
um,
the inhibitory?
it does different things to different people. So like the Space Guild, they can use the spice to look out into space and make sure there's no objects or no anything going to come in the path of the spaceship, and they can fold time and send the ship through without it colliding with anything. So they project the entire course of the ship across the galaxy, right?
Wow.
So then there's other people that use the spice for like I think, what are they called, mentats or something, where they actually play out all these different scenarios, um, so that everything can be accounted for, and then they tell either whoever they're working for all the options. These are the 3 best options, and this is the outcome of each one. So it's then they kind of pick what to do.
Mhm.
Then there's a kind of a quasi religious guild of all women, and they are controlling the genetics of everybody so that they can create the Messiah to sit, and that's Paul Atreides. So he is the main character that they create, at least in the first book. And then his offspring end up becoming like god emperors. So
Hmm.
it's a very transhumanist, very everything's explicit. It's like
Mhm.
there is no room for mystery in this universe at all, right? So of those of those 3, Lord of the Rings is the closest to what we actually live in. So I had a hard time reading this Hideous Strength, the last book of the
It is
space.
hard. It is hard to get through, but did you get at least 100 pages in before you gave up?
I went through the whole thing, and
Oh,
I
okay.
honestly, that book I listened to, and it's like, oh my goodness, my mind would wander. It's like it wasn't something that captured me, but I did get through the whole thing finally. Yeah.
Well, I think
So
it's because it's it's creating the world that it's creating is almost boy, it's hard to put into words, but you know, sometimes you're in a situation where you feel like things are so strange, you just can't get a handle on what's happening because the people around you are, they seem to be living on a different plane than you are. And so you just can't get a handle on what's happening. Have you ever had that experience where you've been in a situation where, and I think that's what he's trying to create there, is that feeling, because all of those people at the university there are living in a reality that they've created for themselves. Not it's not the real world. And I mean, it's exactly like the universities today, from what I hear. Although I haven't watched much news, I do hear people talking about the way the universities are collapsing. And it's because everything becomes very unreal, and you can't grab anything, you can't touch anything, you can't have this, um even though everything is supposedly explained, it's all explained in a way that's not connected to reality. So you're kind of in this nether world. And and that's kind of the way that book feels to me. I've read it 3 times now, and every time I start reading it, I get this feeling like I've been plunged into a place that I have no grip. I have no grip at all. Especially when they start digging Merlin up, and like, what is happening here? And
Yeah.
and I it's very hard for me to have any. Usually
So
when I read a book, I get relationship with the characters, and then I care about what happens to them. But I don't feel that for any of the characters in that book. I don't care about Jane. I don't care about Mark,
yeah,
right?
I was the same
Um,
way.
because they're so foreign to me. And
Right.
yet I think that's what he's trying to say. I think he's trying to build a world that's that foreign. So then that when by the time it gets to the end, and then you meet the people up there at St. Anne's, and it's like, oh, okay, these people I understand. I feel some comfort here and some warmth and some joy. Um, but that makes it very hard to get into that book.
Yeah. And so how so Dune is the transhumanist thing. And I kind of think of I'll say it like this, maybe it'll make sense. The space trilogy storyline, everything that happens there, it's kind of like fundamentalist religion in a way to me. So it's like when when you take implicit things and then you try to make them explicit, it's like taking a beautiful animal, putting it in a cage, putting it in a zoo to put it on display to consume it. It completely loses what it actually is, right? So that's kind of what fundamentalism does. When you take every single thing that's supposed to be a mystery and try to solve it and then make people believe this, that's kind of what's going on in that institution. Do, do you see what how I'm trying to put that together?
So you
So
think
there's
that's what's happening in all 3 of the books, or just in that hideous strength?
Well, I think in all three of them, it's kind of happening. Like the first two, I didn't see it as like it was there in all three of them. I kind of saw that's what happens though when you try to take things that are supposed to be a mystery and make them. So you take what's supposed to stay implied, and then you try to capture it. It it actually taints it.
So did you
So
read, have you ever read Till We Have Faces?
no, no,
Okay.
that's C.S. Lewis as well.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
He always said it was his best work. And I had tried to read it a few years ago and just couldn't get into it. But then I read it just recently, and really got captured by it. And that is one where it's so implicit that you're left wondering until the very end, you're left wondering where is this going? And even at the end, I mean, it leaves a lot of questions, but it really makes you think, really, really makes you think, which is one of the things that I think makes it so beautiful. But it's written about the time period of I don't know exactly what era it would be, but it would be sometime during the Middle Ages, I guess, early Middle Ages maybe. And he just creates the atmosphere with such riches and depth, and you can smell the smells and you can hear the noises and you can see the images that he's creating as he's planted these people in this era. um, it's quite a remarkable book, and it's all about one person's journey.
Hmm.
And 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 it's one of these things where I don't know if you've ever heard Jordan Peterson talk about how you can watch a movie and everything in the movie seems to be saying one thing. And then you get to the very end of the movie and there's this little twist. And that little twist at the end of the movie, your brain just catapults back all the way through the whole film. And you go, oh no, that meant that. And that meant, and then all the way back to the beginning. And it kind of rewrites the whole story in your mind. That's what happens to this one woman in Till We Have Faces. All the way through her life, you're hearing her story from her perspective. And then at the very end, you hear she herself gets this image of, oh, I saw that. Oh, I saw that upside, and that was inside out. And oh no, and then it goes all the way, catapults you all the way back through the whole story.
Sounds like my life.
Yes, it is. It's exactly like a life. That's what's so powerful about it, because um you go through the whole book thinking, well, I'm nothing like her and I would never be anything like her. Then you get to the very end of the book and it's like,
It's like,
oops.
oh, oh wait, that's me. Well, let me let me throw this one at you. So, Lord of the Rings, I think a good story is something that you can actually take inside yourself. So, inside of me is Middle Earth, and I have that ring of power, that frame, that narrative, that person
Mhm,
you're just talking about in that story, that I see my world through that ring, through that
mhm,
frame, through that
mhm.
narrative, right? That's inside me. All the other characters are in there too, battling, so what I and I know I've talked to you about this before and it's hard to explain. Maybe this would be a good way to do it. So Adam and Eve are in the garden and they have access to God's vision. So it's the vision in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings that's outside this, it's outside. It's implied, but it's out there. God's of it. But in the garden, Adam and Eve were there, they were with God and they had that access. When Adam and Eve fell, they fell from God's vision all the way down to their own. And that's kind of that tower inside me from Sauron's tower. That's how we look at the world um, is skewed. It's skewed by our wants, our desires, our lusts, our pain, our longing, even good things. If we have longing for good things, but they're out of balance, they can skew how we look at everything. Does that make sense?
It's a
So,
beautiful description of my life. Yes.
well,
As
it's
you were
everybody's
as
life,
you were
Karen.
talking, I was picturing the frame of the ring, and then there's that one scene in Lord of the Rings where Sauron is looking down into this underground where he's got all the orcs building his what
Yep.
territory or whatever, and then they're birthing the new orcs and they're digging these orcs up out of the earth. I spend an awful lot of my time manufacturing orcs that are fighting against me.
Right. Yeah, don't we all? So so that story resonates with me because of that. There's a but that tower inside me has to come down. And that narrative has to be so I told you this before, I'll share it again. Maybe I should back up a little more. When I was young, very young, and the whole reason why I'm so attached to creation, when I was like 10 years old, I started thinking about killing myself. I felt so unloved and just so unwanted. But when I would go out in the woods next to our house or play in the creek there, I would just get lost and I would find peace and it would renew me. And I know looking back on it that God had me in the palm of his hand before I even knew him. And he was holding on to me, right? When my daughter was born, I remember holding her and just looking at her thinking, I cannot make her feel that way. There's just no way I wouldn't let it happen. So I started to look for answers. That's how I ended up coming to Christ. And but when I prayed to God that he would teach me how to love her, how to act towards her. What I didn't realize at the time is that for me to love, to have that communion that I talked about in our last talk and we alluded to earlier, I had to let God fill me. He had to be the one in control. But for me to have that happen, I had to be poured out. And so that tower had to come down. And it was painful. There was, wow, it was, you know how the Bible talks about generational sin and how that gets passed on. Both my brother and I became Christians and kind of as a transition generation to a new story now. And that all happened because of God, but all of the stuff that so I have like a foot in each generation, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But I know and I found out that that tower's still there. I mean, the rubble's still there, the ring's still there, and I have the ability to reach for that again and pick that up and look through that frame, my frame again. That's one of the things about Lord of the Rings. Uh, Frodo is the hero. That's what everyone says. But Frodo didn't actually destroy the ring. He didn't destroy it. He couldn't destroy it. When he got to the chasm, he held it over the edge and he said, "It's mine. I'm going to keep it." He couldn't do it. I don't think we can do that either. I mean, God does it ultimately. In the final version of me, that'll be destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that implicit truth that's in that story is just so powerful to me. It's so powerful because it resonates with me a lot. Um, and so,
You
you
mean
know,
the fact that it's only through our relationship
what's
with
outside,
others.
well, what's outside guiding
Yes,
everything
yes,
and guiding those relationships with others.
yes,
And so,
yes.
so I can relate with Frodo. I've been there with that ring, and I think I'll keep this, right? I can identify with Sam and saying, I see the beauty in the world and I want to be part of it. It's almost like a childlike like view of creation and everything, but it's good. It's not a bad thing to have, right? But also like Aragorn, he's the king. So I play that role too. So I have all these different roles in my life that I play, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of like how I see the whole story there. But it's a lot more richer than the space trilogy to me, or because everything is defined in my life. There were so many things that are I don't know how it all worked out. I can even look back on some things and I just don't know. but there was some hand in it that made it all work. So um, I don't know if there's much more to say about these stories here. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Well, let's say I think of your life as a painting and I think of my life as a painting. Because I mean, I have the exact same struggle where I can have days when I feel entirely submitted to and in love with Jesus, and I understand, I just understand, and I'm I feel radiant inside and out, and I can love people. I have days like that. Well, I have hours like that, minutes sometimes, But I also have days when I'm just holding on, when I'm just so desperately trying not to grab that ring. Now, like in my life, I always think of the ring as my desire for food, because food has in my past and often in my future probably has a grip on me. Both my parents were alcoholics, and I'm the generation that is not an alcoholic, but food has the same kind of an impact on me, especially sugar. And so that ring is like, I have days when I think if I got started down that road today, I would probably not stop. I would just keep barreling. I would just eat everything I would just eat every sweet thing in the house if I let myself go. And but I know that this is all a wrong. I'm not saying that this is the right way to do things. I know I've done all the wrong things, because that kind of addiction, there are ways to deal with that addiction, I guess, but um, because it's food, you have to eat food sometimes. So I've tried to find a way to at least not let it go to the point where I just can't stop, right? So I have some limits, but then I still gain weight, even eating just moderate amounts, because I'm always just that little bit extra, just that little bit extra I want, And but if I think of our lives as a painting, one of the ways that I paint when I do art is I kind of mess things up, and then I go in and I clean it up. And then I mess it up and then I clean it up. I mess it up and I clean it up. And what the final result of that makes for me in a painting is something that, in my eyes at least, is so much richer and more complex than I could achieve if I just started with a white canvas and did everything right in the first place. First of all, I probably don't have the skill to do that, but I have seen people that do, where they can make a perfect picture. But in my eyes, that perfect picture does not have as much beauty in it as a picture that's filled with scars and errors and repeats and fixes, and at the end, I think I end up with something that speaks more. And I kind of think that that's what happens with our lives. I mean, yes, we're not supposed to make the wrong choices, but when we do make the wrong choices, he makes a way for us to come back. And then we have another test and we fail that test, and he makes a way for us to have another test. And maybe we do a little bit better on the next test. And then maybe we fail the test after that. But he's
Right.
always coming back and giving us, a new,
There's always a thread of hope.
there's always a thread of hope. Yes. And that's the beauty. Now, I mean, you look back at someone like Joseph, things happened to him, but most of the times he made the right choices when he was in that thing. So his life was marred by the things that happened to him. But there were people like David in the scriptures, a lot of the stuff he brought on himself, and he also brought it on other people. And yet God just kept faithfully working in him
Mm-hmm.
because of his love. So Yep.
It's amazing, really. So I have had conversations like this, and the people that I've had the best conversations with have been people that uh, are in AA.
Mm-hmm.
And when I tell them this how I see Lord of the Rings in this tower, and how the ring is there, and it they understand what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not really a drinking problem, it's a thinking problem.
Yes.
The first move is to grab the ring, and then the alcohol, but if it's, for me, probably one of the biggest things I struggle with is just isolating myself. I don't want to get hurt.
Mm-hmm.
So I go into the fortress that Sauron's in, and I just hide.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's hard to love people when you're in there.
Well, and
But
that's the other thing about the ring. When you put the ring on, if you're just holding the ring, it has a certain draw, right? But if you put the ring on, you disappear. And I kind of feel like um, living in denial is like you put the ring on, then you can live in denial. And that's a real issue for me is that put the ring
yeah.
on, I can feel like I'm invisible. The rules don't apply to me anymore. I can kind of do what I want to do because nobody can see me, but it's just living in denial because none of that is true because the
Right.
consequences of that behavior always show up, whether you're wearing the ring or not wearing the ring, right?
So that's the pride
Mm-hmm.
that was right at the garden at the beginning, and it's what's in me still.
Mm-hmm.
And so picking that up, you know, one thing though, God has not let me hang on to it very long, fortunately, I guess. But it's still always there. And I don't think we should ever underestimate the power that it has. When we we're in control instead of God being in control. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the other thing I wanted to bring into this conversation is that I don't I don't want to create my identity because I don't know how to do it, or what it should be. I want God to create my identity. I want him to build the final version of who I'm going to be and get me there, help get me there. So the whole talk we had today was like I wanted to bring that into it because I don't want people to think that this is something they have to figure out everything. It's not that at all. You can't figure out everything. You can't
Mm-hmm.
figure out all the steps to get there. You don't even know who you're going to be. And, it's like sounds like that story. What is it? I should read that, about
Till,
faces
till we have faces.
till we have faces. All
Yeah,
right.
if you're interested, if you like listening to books on tape, there's a guy who has a YouTube channel and he read the whole book on his YouTube channel, one chapter at a time.
Hmm.
And I guess he's maybe an amateur actor or something, but he did a beautiful job reading it. And that's the way I read it the first time, and then I read the text afterwards. But yeah, I can put that in the notes. What were you going to say about that then?
I think it would be something worth reading just to have another perspective. But again, like coming back to the implicit and the explicit, I know, and you probably have run into this as well. This different personality types process information differently. They gather it differently. So
Mm,
there are people that are highly sensory oriented, and a lot of engineers that I've worked with, men especially, uh, they kind of fall into this game, into this. category. They have to see it to believe it, right? So that kind of their left brain, and they're going to be more explicit information oriented. So I'm more right brain and more intuitive. So I can remember trying to describe it sounds so silly, but I had a drawing of a part of a machine we were going to integrate, and the company we were going to buy it from was going to supply it just the way it was designed, but an opposite hand version of it. And that guy could not imagine that. He could not imagine that machine being mirrored around because he couldn't see it. It was it was quite a strange experience I had. But there's a lot. I mean, he was extreme, almost like in the autistic realm, maybe a little bit. But I think you can kind of see that in some of the conversations that, like, I think Sam Harris is that way. I don't think Sam Harris can intuit things very well. Everything's sensory. It's got to see it. It's got to be explicit. Got to, Um, but other people, like I think Jordan Peterson has a lot of intuition, and
Mhm.
he sees into things a lot deeper.
Mhm.
So, um, but one of the, I know I had talked to you about this before, but I came across a video. I tried to find it before and I couldn't, but it was back up, so it's on YouTube, and it's about and I want to kind of bring this back to communion and how being a, learning how to train horses really changed my perspective on how we can be in communion with nature, with creation, and with people. Um, but I think the last time I kind of tried to explain this, I might have went too far to make it. Almost maybe made it sound like turn this knob, pull this lever. It was like trying to balance out your intentions and your communication and your action so that you could find that harmony with the other person. But um, I don't know if that was the best way to describe it. So I thought maybe I would just show it, because I think that really what we're doing is we're dancing with it. We're dancing with another person in communion. It's not really because it's always different, and sometimes you lead and sometimes they lead.
Mhm.
It's it's like it's like catching a butterfly. I remember when I was a young boy trying to catch butterflies, and every time you try to catch them, you'd hurt them. You couldn't really catch them, even with a net or whatever. You'd screw up their wing or something, and it. So it's like it's just something you hold in your hand. It's a it's not something you can grasp.
Mhm.
So I'm gonna try and share this and see if it works. Um, Let me
Mhm.
do this.
Well, if it doesn't, I've also got it pulled up on my screen. So
Can you see it?
yes, uh-huh.
Okay, so this is I think 2006 maybe. So the video quality is not very good because the phones weren't good then. But this is what's called a reining competition, and it's a national competition. I'm gonna see if I can. I don't know if I
Did
have
you
a video.
say rating as in
Uh,
RAIDING?
rain reining
Oh,
like
reining. Oh, like a horse's reins. Yeah.
yes, yeah. I don't, can you see that picture, or is it
Yes,
just on
yes,
that?
uh-huh. Yeah, I can.
So this is the normal. They call it tack, but the gear you'd have on the horse, you'd have the saddle and the blanket, and you have the reins, and you'd have the bit and the
Mhm.
headstock, and you have the headstall here that goes around the head, the chin strap. So when you pull on these reins, it actually puts leverage on the bottom. That's a lever there in the bridle.
Mhm.
It actually puts pressure on a horse's lower jaw, and so that's how you control them. So you can turn them, you can back them up. There's it's how you stop the horse. So they started doing competitions where people would like see how good they could get with the reins on the horse, and see how responsive the horse could get. And so this video I'm going to show is a reining competition, but this young woman shows up to this competition with no saddle, no bridle, no reins. So she's in a reining competition and has no reins at all.
Oh, so when I watched the video, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so that really changes it,
So
doesn't it?
everybody else that's been in the competition has had the full tack.
Right. So
Wow.
she did that shut it off? I don't want
Oh,
that
no,
music
no,
to
we're
ding.
still, yeah, there's no music. Yeah.
Okay,
Here
so
she comes with the horse and no,
she has absolutely no tack at
mm-hmm.
all. So in our video, we talked. Do you see the horse licking its lips? Can you see it licking its
Yes,
lips?
yes, I can. Uh-huh.
When you
But
do
but the horse
something,
is also doing that beautiful, whatever that step is, where they go sideways and
yeah, it's called side passing. So that horse when it licks its lips is acknowledging that you communicated with it.
hmm.
So they're communicating to each other. She's not saying a word. And look what she gets this horse to do. It's pretty fascinating to me. Now, I actually could do this with my horse, not anywhere near the skill level of this woman, though. She's and the horse too. The two of them together is amazing.
Well, we probably don't get to see the whole video, but towards the end, she
No,
gets the horse running so fast and then stop on a
yeah,
dime.
that's what I'm going to do here. I'm just going to go to that.
Okay.
So this is, and then she gets it to back up straight, which is there's all these different moves they have to do in this competition, and she did them all, and she got a perfect score out of this. So, oh, there we go. Sorry. So there's a predator standing on a prey animal's back, waving its arms around, and the horse doesn't care. I think that's amazing.
Well, I have to tell you honestly, when I watched this video in preparation for today, I was in tears by the end of it because I was thinking, what would it be like to to be so one with,
Now watch a horse walk with her. There's no coercion. There's no force. It's licking its lips. It wants to be with her.
uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, that's the feeling I got through the whole thing is that the
Yeah,
horse was not being coerced, was not being managed, but
right.
this was a relationship of love. And the horse has something to give her and she has something to give the horse.
Right.
And
So
they each have their,
there's a communion here. There's actually agape love here. And when I started training horses, but it's this style of training that I did. Now, if you just went and learned how to, and somebody didn't understand a lot of this, what she did was learn how to communicate in the horse's language, which is body language. When I would ride my horse and we were in an arena like that, we'd run in a circle, go into the corner, just how I would position my body, and I would just look where I wanted to go. I didn't have reins on her. I had a halter and just a rope, but I didn't use it. And I would just look, and my horse would go where I'd look. It was so in tune with my head position. Now, if I sat up straighter, it wouldn't do that. I had to lean forward and look, and then that's when the horse knew. So I wanted to share that because this kind of is, if you were looking at this just from the explicit point of view and what's going on here, it's a woman and a horse, and but it's so much more because the what's implicit there is that was a symphony of proper relational decisions over time. The two of them were in agape for a long period of time. They learned how to communicate with each other. So when I when I went, um, let me back up a little bit. So my dad and I, when I was younger, we had a very strained relationship. But when I became a Christian and I started to really like have my world kind of tore down, I was able to start communicating with him with the language that he spoke, which wasn't the same language I spoke. And through all that, I learned that um, he was showing me love when I was young, but not the way I wanted it. And so my view of what it should be kept it from happening. And his view of he didn't pay attention to what I needed. You
Mhm.
see how that worked?
Mhm.
So after I became a Christian, and him and I I started to learn how to dance with my dad, how to learn how to dance with him.
Mhm.
And and we really grew close over the years. And it was beautiful. We ended up moving next door to him. We had a farm. He was right there, and my kids got to know him, and I really saw that soften him over the years. Um, when um, I don't know, it was in 2012. He, I had a dream about him, and a few weeks after I had that dream, I was in his workshop, and I was talking to him, and I could tell something was wrong, and I could tell this coming on for a while, and maybe that it's, but I actually talked to him, and he shared with me that he didn't want to live anymore,
Mhm.
and so he said he didn't feel loved, and I like, Dad, you don't, I love you. Do you know I love you? And he started crying, and he's like, you're the only thing that keeps me going on. And the dream I had 2 weeks before that was I found him dead. 2 weeks after we had that talk, I actually did find him dead in his house. And that left so many questions in my mind, because when I talked to him, I told him, you need Christ to carry you. You need Christ's love. He's the one that can carry you through this. And I didn't have another talk with him before he died to know if he really got there, you know? So that whole experience, that put me into a, like an aviation term would be like a spiritual stall, and then ultimately a flat spin. I thought I had a right to know, you know?
Mhm.
And but we had horses then, and we had a small horse that was born on our farm, and it needed to be trained. And that's the horse that I actually, it was a year after my dad died. I took that horse into that arena and started learning how to train it. And this experience that I just showed you with this woman is what snapped me out of that. What snapped me out of that, because I had that. I It's like I learned how to dance again, and it it's like I would. How would you ever, how would you ever like write a story like that? You know what God did and how He worked through my life. So there's implicit truth that was in that relationship with that horse that brought me back. And it's kind of like we all have access to that, and we have access to that with each other. And I dance with people, not all the time, not physically dancing, but spiritually dancing with them and trying to learn, how can I commune with this person? And sometimes they're total strangers, but I don't know. I think there's a lot to learn if you look at the world through kind of the idea of the implicit and the explicit, and what you can see and what you can't see, and what is God implying in the situation you're in. And what can you learn from it? And can you see the reflection off of the explicit of the glory of God in this situation? Because that's what knowledge is for. That's what it's for. It's for being able to navigate communion properly. And if that's not the outcome, then something isn't working right. So, and my friend Dave that died, that was another person I danced with. I think I emailed you, told you about that. That was his son died. His son died. He actually dated my daughter, his son, and he ended up becoming a Christian. His son did, and he told his dad. He said, "Listen, if you want to see me again, you have to accept Christ. You have to promise me you're going to at least try." And he did, and because of that, him and I ended up in this dance together. And he was so, understandably so, just why God, why would your God, he would ask me this, why would your God take my son from me? And I had no answers for him, and in the middle of all this, as I'm dancing with this man, my dad died. So then I had the same kind of questions he did. And then the horse came into this. And so it's like, it's not a path I would ever choose, but it's beautiful because of, in fact, when I think about it, it overwhelms me how much God's love was in the middle of all of it, in the middle of all of it. But when I came out kind of out the other side, it's like, I don't have a right to know. I don't have a right to know.
Mm-hmm.
That's God. That's God's business. I couldn't understand it, and I wouldn't choose the right thing anyway. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of implicit truth that was buried in this whole story that I went through. So I don't think we should overlook its importance. Let's see if I have a picture of my horse. I think I found one the other day. Me and my horse.
Yeah, when my brother died,
That's my horse and me.
oh
There's a there's a lot there in that picture.
yes,
A lot,
certainly is.
and the knowledge of the story I told you, like, really makes that picture understandable. That kind of like brought me back from the edge. What about your brother? I'm sorry.
I just was going to say, my brother died in 1986. I had just gone to Japan as a missionary, and I'd had many conversations with my brother about faith, and he was always very hostile. Um, he was very much a materialist, atheist, and um, so he died in a small plane crash. And I was in Alaska, and I didn't have the funds to go to. He lived in Alaska. I didn't have the funds to go to the funeral or anything. So it was a really, really, really hard time. Like, what does this all mean? I mean, I've just given up everything at home and gone to Japan to be a missionary, and I had so longed for my brother to know the same good news, that I had learned, and I had absolutely no assurance that, I mean, I could make up stories for myself that as the plane was going down, he remembered something, I had no idea. But
Right.
after about 6 months of wrestling with that, the only conclusion I could come to, but it's also been a conclusion that has held me through everything else since, was that God is good. And whatever happened there, it happened out of the goodness of God. And God, I mean, whatever happened with my brother's final destination
Wow.
is out of the goodness of God. And I really believe that God is good, and whatever decision God made was good. And that has you know, when the ring is not my frame, that is my frame, right?
Yeah.
So I can choose which frame to look through. um, but I had a talk the other day that's not going to publish until closer to the end of December with a young man who's just made a huge breakthrough. And part of that breakthrough was trying to look back through life and seeing yourself as the child and God as the father. And what is, as the father, what is God telling you as a child in that moment? Even thinking back to a childhood when you felt rejected and lonely and abandoned, and to see yourself as that child and to actually see God there with you, loving you. And the conversation I had with him had such an impact on me that I've been dwelling with that a lot in the last few days. Just thinking about the little girl that I was and the decisions that I made to protect myself from those feelings of rejection and abandonment set me on a path of habits and patterns that were destructive. But but maybe there was a coherent reason for me to make those decisions. But I don't have to live with those decisions anymore because I can look back and I can see, yes, God was there with me and he was loving me and he was seeing the little girl that I was, and not, he was not abandoning me or betraying me in that situation, right? He was right
Right.
there with me. And it has really renewed my heart of worship and of wanting to spend more time in his presence. And yeah, so I'm
So
eager
the
for everybody to hear that conversation.
yeah, that sounds great. It's God carries us from being victims to being victorious, you know, and I'm not just talking about victims from people oppressing us, victims of
Mhm,
my own vices and schemes, and how we can overcome that. It's but that I think that's all found in the implicit. It's not something you can find in a, you know, in knowledge you can put in a cage,
mhm,
because everyone's story is different, and every, you know, what I need and what I believe I need, they're worlds apart. They're so, you know, that's the, like, the hope that we talked about earlier, that thread of hope that pulls us forward. It's like knowing that we're going to get there makes it possible
mhm,
to keep moving forward. And knowing, and I know, I mean, not that I would recommend like going into a flat spin spiritually, but even if you do, God will bring you out of it.
mhm,
He did me. So very thankful and grateful for everything he's done, to the point where it overwhelms me sometimes. It's hard to, I'm surprised I actually got through this because I thought it was going to be a lot harder to not keep my composure, not because I'm sad, because I get overwhelmed by it. It's
mhm,
just so amazing to see what he's done, you know. But that suffering is all in there. It's all wrapped up in it. The pain's all part of it. And without that, I wouldn't be who I am. So that tower had to come down. That ring, that's a,
Well, I'm very thankful for who you are, Brad.
oh, thanks.
Um,
Same.
our conversations are very meaningful to me, and also the fact that you're very loyal to friendship, so you don't just take it as a one-off, oh, let's go do this thing on the YouTube or something.
Yeah.
You actually keep in touch with me, and you actually care about the people who are listening, and And that's all part of it too, that God has made
Right.
you a person who, you ever read The Velveteen Rabbit?
A long time ago.
Yeah.
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 Vaguely remember it.
Well, Velveteen Rabbit doesn't become real until all its fur gets rubbed off.
Ooh, so that sounds like fun. So, you made me just think of something though. I'm going to share it here. I have a really, really hard time with the internet. So I can dance with people. I can dance with that horse. I can be in nature. I can feel like I'm one with creation and God's there with us and or with me, but on here I have a hard time. I have a really hard time. You're the only person I've really, really connected deeply with. And I don't know, maybe because we talked, but um I feel blind. It's like even now I got a camera here and you're there. I want to look at your eyes, but I want you to know I'm paying attention to you. So I can't do both at the same time. It's just like what I do with the horses, and when I engage with other people, so much of it isn't words. It's not words. Some of the moments where I felt the most connected with another human being, and I'm not talking, I mean, like my friend Dave, when his son died, when I went to the funeral home, volumes were spoken between us, and we never said a word to each other.
Hmm.
I held him in my arms, and he cried for like 2 minutes straight, just bawling his eyes out.
Hmm.
And we just parted ways, and I stopped down to see him a few days later, and so it's not the explicit meanings found in the implicit things.
Hmm.
And it's hard for me to find the implicit things on here. I don't know why. I just struggle with it. So,
Hmm.
and I don't
Well,
know,
I think it's because they have to be abstracted first. They have to be pulled up, abstracted, sent out over the airwaves, and then pulled back down and
yeah.
unwound inside of us.
So,
It's
so
a
the
thing.
implicit things are reflected off of the explicit, and this is like another layer. So it's like a reflection of a reflection or something.
Hmm. Yeah,
It's
yeah,
just another, like Peugeot would call it, another layer of skin. So
yeah, yeah,
I think I think I think there's a lot of good things happening. It's just hard for me to participate in it for some reason. I don't know why.
yeah. Well, I'm glad you participate here. Appreciate it very
Yeah,
much.
me too. Thank you for having me on. I really like talking to you.
Well,
And
this was a terrific conversation, and I had no idea it was going to go where it did, but I'm thankful.
uh, yeah, me too. I How do you explain implicit things without taking go too far with it?
Well,
You
you
know, and
can't. Once you explain it,
yeah,
it's not implicit anymore.
right. So
I mean, this is why I've always said I think creativity is so vital to humanity because every person has some aspect of creativity that they can express, whether it's in designing machinery or sewing or cooking or gardening or painting or writing or doing poetry. Um, and then that creativity it brings out what's implicit in that individual out into the world to share with others because the implicit parts of us are what are so deeply in us that we can't articulate them, but they're part of what God has woven into us. And that needs to come out into the mainstream and shared with everybody so that we all get the full picture of the beauty that God is creating, right? But if
yes.
people
Mhm.
either are too busy or too afraid to find a creative expression, then we never get to see that side of them because you can't bring the minute you bring that stuff out and try to put it into words, it loses its
Yeah. You said something in our last talk. What was it? Let me think. It was a truth once spoken becomes a lie.
that's what this Russian lady told me one time.
Yeah.
And I
We
don't know
said,
what it actually means, but I know what it came to mean to me. Yeah.
what does it imply? Right. So Yeah, there's a
I mean,
lot.
I think that's because once we start speaking, our filters get engaged, and then our filters change it even as it's coming out of our mouths, because maybe I'm looking at your face and I see you looking a little bit askance, and I think, well, maybe he doesn't want to hear it that way. And so I shift a little bit, and then, and then I hear it myself and I think, well, that's not quite right. And I shift it a little bit more. And by the time it gets all out there, it's not what I meant in the beginning. So
Right.
I think we can have a lot of implicit truth in us that just can't be explained verbally.
Right. Right. Because you, like you just said it, as soon as you say it, it's it's explicit now. Implicit becomes explicit. So
Yeah.
we can show it though. We can show it.
Yeah.
And that's the whole idea of this, like dancing.
Mhm.
It's like it's not about telling people. It's about showing them. And being in that relationship, the relationship reveals the implicit, because that's what the implicit is. It's the communion.
Well, that's what I got from that film of the woman and the horse, was the beauty and the power that comes from that kind of a friendship or a communion
Hmm.
that neither one could experience without the other,
Right.
right? Now, the
Yeah.
horse, even if the horse could think the way we think, it probably had no idea it could accomplish those things.
It would never do it on its own.
Would
Right.
never do it on its own, right? And certainly without the horse, she could never accomplish those things. And so the two
Hmm.
of them together, there's not only this vision of beauty that's going on, but there's a power there. And yeah, I was in tears the first time I watched that video. So thank you
Good.
for bringing it to me. I have somebody showing up at the house, and I got to
Okay.
go, but this has been great, Brad. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for getting in touch with me, and
You're welcome. Thank
have
you
a
for having me
wonderful,
on.
wonderful Christmas. Do you
You
have
too.
do you have family coming for Christmas?
Our family's all here, so yeah, we'll get together. It's kind of hard because everyone's going different places, with
Yeah,
kids and everything. But yeah, we always have a good Christmas. So I hope you have a good Christmas too.
we will. Yeah, my I have one daughter that lives in the area, and then my other daughter's coming back for Christmas. So I'm very much looking forward to having them both here. And my granddaughter's going to be with us too, so it's going to be really good.
All right. Awesome.
Okay. Have a
All
great
right. We'll see you.
bye bye.
Bye.